A folded paper arrives at George Washington's headquarters. The address on it is in a stranger's hand. The body of it, when opened, is mostly numbers. Hundreds of numbers. They mean nothing to anyone who finds the letter. They mean everything to the man who reads it. In the corner of the page, held close to a candle, words appear in a second ink that is the color of water until the heat brings it through. The letters describe, in the steady, plain prose of a New York merchant, the British Army's plans for the coming week. The letter is unsigned. It is written, the bottom of it says, by a man called Samuel Culper. There is no such man. Some people change the world, and the world never learns their name. This is Without Whom. In September 1776, the British Army took New York City. They would hold it for the next 7 years. Inside the city were tens of thousands of British soldiers and the entire British High Command for the American War. Washington had been forced to retreat with his ragged army into New Jersey. He had no idea what was happening inside the city he had lost. And he could not win the war without knowing. His first attempt had failed within weeks. A young teacher named Nathan Hale had volunteered to slip into the city in plain clothes and gather intelligence. The British caught him almost at once. He had his notes folded into the lining of his shoe. They hanged him from a tree in Lower Manhattan the next morning. He was 21 years old. Washington learned, from his death, that amateurs die. For 2 years after that, Washington fought a war while almost blind. He had fragments, he had rumors, he had nothing he could trust. In November 1778, he gave a young cavalry major a quiet new commission. Build me a network of people who live in the city. Build it slowly, build it carefully. Never let me find out who they are. The young major was Benjamin Tallmadge. He was 24 years old, a Yale-educated New Englander who had grown up in Setauket on the north shore of Long Island, where his father had been the village minister, and where the boys he had played with as a child were now living, quietly, inside British-occupied territory. He had also been, 6 years earlier, a friend of Nathan Hale. Tallmadge went back to Setauket. He chose his first agent from the people he had known since he was 8 years old. An old schoolfellow named Abraham Woodhull, a 33-year-old farmer with a brother in a British prison ship. Woodhull was given a name to use that did not exist: Samuel Culper, Sr. The senior would matter later. Woodhull did not want the job. He took it anyway. He was, by his own quiet admission, terrified almost every day for the next 5 years. He rode his cart into New York City to deliver his produce. He wrote down what he saw and heard, and he carried the letters home in his coat. Every visit could have been the one that hanged him. A young Setauket tavern keeper named Austin Rowe became the postman. Rowe rode the 110 miles from Setauket to New York City and back, again and again, ostensibly to buy dry goods for his tavern. In the bottom of every order was a thin, folded letter. He carried the ring's letters in and out of the city for 5 years. On the Connecticut side of the Sound waited a whaleboat captain named Caleb Brewster. Brewster was a deep-water sailor who had been raiding British supply boats for 2 years already. He ran a small flotilla of long, open boats across the Sound by night, dodging British naval patrols. When the letter from Setauket was ready, Brewster rowed it across the water to a courier on the Connecticut shore. The courier rowed it to Tallmadge. For the network to work properly, they needed a man inside the city itself. They found him in a Quaker dry goods merchant named Robert Townsend. Townsend was Manhattan-born, soft-voiced, and so trusted by the British officers who came into his shop that they spoke openly across the counter to him about troop movements and supply orders. he took the second of the two pseudonyms. He became Samuel Culper, Jr. Townsend built himself a remarkable cover. He bought a share of a New York coffeehouse with a prominent Loyalist newspaper publisher. He wrote a society column for that same Loyalist newspaper. British officers came into the coffeehouse to drink. They came into his shop to buy. They came up to his column to be flattered. And they told him, by name, everything they were about to do. To carry the letters home undetected, the ring needed ink that could not be seen. They got it from a New York physician, the older brother of John Jay. He had developed a chemical stain that could be written between the lines of an ordinary letter, dried invisible, sent through enemy hands, and brought back by a sister reagent at the other end. Washington called it a great blessing on the work. Tallmadge gave them a private numeric code. He drew up a booklet of more than 700 numbers, each one standing for a person, place, or phrase. The number 711 stood for George Washington, 727 for New York, 745 for England. A letter intercepted by the British would be a wall of meaningless figures. The story that has come down to us is that one of Woodhull's neighbors, Anna Strong, watched for Brewster's whaleboat and signaled the ring by hanging her laundry. A black petticoat meant the boat was in. The handkerchiefs meant the cove. Historians treat the clothesline as folk tradition, but Anna Strong's place inside the network is documented. A typical letter began on a back table in a Manhattan coffeehouse and ended on Washington's writing desk within a week. 5 different operatives, 3 changes of vehicle. 1 man on each link who knew only one of his neighbors by name. In the summer of 1780, the work paid off. A French fleet was landing at Newport, Rhode Island, with 6,000 French soldiers. The British commander in New York was secretly assembling a force to ambush them on the beach. Townsend heard them planning it. The letter went out. Washington marched loudly toward New York. The British commander turned to defend the city. The French came ashore unharmed. They were the soldiers who would, a year later, win the war at Yorktown. 2 months later, the same network helped break open the most famous betrayal in American history. Benedict Arnold had been secretly selling the plans of his West Point fortress to the British for £20,000 in gold. When his British handler was captured by ordinary American militiamen, the papers in his boot revealed the plot. Tallmadge himself was the officer the spy was first taken to. Arnold escaped down the Hudson by minutes. West Point did not fall. For 5 years, inside the most heavily garrisoned British city in North America, not one was caught. Not one unmasked. Woodhull's barn was never searched. Brewster's boat was never boarded. Townsend's coffeehouse was never raided. Tallmadge's code was never broken. The British command would learn, decades after the war, that they had been watched, day in and day out, since 1776. After the war, Washington never publicly named any of them. Tallmadge wrote his memoirs and never identified them. Brewster went back to the sea. Rowe went back to his tavern. Woodhull went back to the farm. Townsend went back to the dry goods shop, an old Quaker bachelor, and died in 1838 with his secret intact. It would be 1929 before a Long Island historian compared the handwriting in some forgotten Townsend family letters to the unsigned letters of Samuel Culper, Jr. in a Washington archive, and gave him his name back. Every modern American intelligence service was built on what these Long Island farmers and that Quaker merchant invented. The code names, the numbered cipher, the handler who never knew the agent's face, the cover business, the friendly newspaper, the dead drop in the barn. They told nobody. The world you live in was built by people you have never heard of. And now, you know one more name. The Culper Ring. Like and subscribe, and stick around, because the textbooks left a lot out. Thanks for watching.